Hi, this is Betty Plus Books, and today I'm going to be talking about the book All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders. This is a book about two main characters, one who is a very young witch and one who is kind of a young technology nerd, who meet in middle school, they become friends, they distance from each other, and then in their adult years they meet up again, and eventually they use their combined prowess with technology and magic to try and save the world. I really love this book, and I felt like it was a really nice combination of that sci-fi and fantasy. I would say that this book uses kind of softish sci-fi and fantasy. Like, it's not super high fantasy, like some people can do fantastical things, but it's not like fireballs and stuff. And with regards to the sci-fi elements, they don't go super deep into how the things work, but there are elements of like artificial intelligence and wormhole travel and time travel, so there are some sci-fi elements in there. I liked how the two main characters throughout the book were both brought together and pushed apart both by their samenesses and their differences. They're kind of outcasts in middle school because one of them's like a huge nerd and one of them's like a witch and everyone calls her like this emo chick or whatever. And they both have really bad relationships with their parents. Like neither of their parents really seem to know how to be good parents and how to deal with their children having any kind of struggle. And they don't really talk to them. Like, they just kind of are aloof and assume that if someone says this kid did something bad, then the kid is a bad kid, and don't really try to help fix the problem or be empathetic. But I did love how their relationship evolved over time. Like, you didn't have the typical like start out as strangers and then the relationship dynamic just goes up from there, or start out as enemies and just have the relationship like improve from there. It was very much a roller coaster of strangers, now they're kind of acquaintances, they have reason to be around each other, they're friends, they're not friends, they're enemies. It was a very dynamic relationship. It wasn't static and it didn't maintain a consistent rise or consistent fall. I also love the way some of the scenes were described. I thought the imagery was very vivid, and that's something that's been appealing to me a lot lately in books. There wasn't a lot I didn't like about this book, although one negative review I read did point out that the characters, when they're children, do tend to kind of talk more like adults. When I was reading later in the book and the character mentions something happened when she was 6, I was like, oh, that was when she was 6? She didn't sound like she was 6. So the characters definitely, like, as children, can speak a little bit non-childlike. But I didn't really notice that until it was pointed out to me, because I guess that's not something that bothers me very much because I'm not around kids a whole lot. So that didn't particularly bother me, but it might bother you. And I feel like while there is some sexual and racial diversity in this book, that diversity is kind of like token. There's a non-binary character, but they're just kind of there. And there are some non-white characters, but things just kind of happen to them. They're not really an active part of the story. It felt like everyone who was like actively did something to progress the story along was mostly like a white straight person. I feel like it can be hard though to draw the line between like, this is tokenism and this is just like, hey, I'm writing a book and these types of people do exist, and so I'm writing them in because they exist. Now, as for who would like this book, I felt like it read a lot more like a contemporary than like the sci-fi and fantasy that I tend to read. So if you're more into like contemporary or magical realism, I think you're more likely to read this than if you're like a big sci-fi fantasy only kind of reader. Also, the content warnings for this book are a lot different than most of the other books I've read. There is some childhood bullying, there's some parental neglect or what might be considered emotional abuse, and there's a lot in the plot having to do with climate change and climate disasters, so those might be some things that some people might find triggering. But if you like the writing style of contemporary and want something that kind of blends sci-fi and fantasy a little bit, you might like this book. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed the whole thing. I felt like the first half was a lot more character driven, and then like the second half of the plot was a lot more like plot driven, but I like both those two things, so it worked for me. I also felt like there was a lot of foreshadowing throughout the book that really paid off well at the end of the book. I kind of had butterflies when I finished it, and I feel like I should have, like, once I finished the audiobook, I was in my car, I should have just like stopped and parked in the Walmart parking lot and like talked about it then, because I feel like I could have gushed so much more about it right when I finished it, but now I'm kind of like losing the details. I'm not sure if it's something that will stick with me, but like at the moment that I finished it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is one of my new favorites. So I think that's it for my review of All the Birds in the Sky. If you read it, let me know what you thought about it in the comments, if there's any details that I missed that were good or bad. If you want to check out my bookmark painting I did for this book, I will link that. This was a double-sided bookmark because I had like 2 ideas for bookmarks for this. So I did one on each side. One is like pretty non-spoilery, just uses like a quote from the book, and the other side is like kind of spoilery if you could like look into and figure out what might happen at the end based on it. But that's it for today. If you like like this video, please like and subscribe. I have been putting out videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but I'm trying to increase my publishing schedule to Monday through Friday, so hopefully you'll be seeing videos from me every weekday. So until tomorrow, happy reading!